welcome to Able Contemporary Gallery. I'm Lauren Miller. I'm the Assistant Director here at Able Contemporary. I'm joined by Tim O'Neill. Today we're going to be talking with Tim about his current show, Halls Creek Lodge, here in number 5, as well as his art practice in general. This talk will be followed by a Q&A, and I'm going to be repeating your questions just so we can make sure that they're heard on our recording, which is going to be made available on our website this weekend. Tim O'Neill is an accomplished studio artist working both in wood and metal. His most recent body of work, Halls Creek Lodge, looks to Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, for inspiration. While surveying the damage wrought by beavers on a recent trip to a friend's riverside cabin, O'Neill was struck by the uncanny resemblance between a chewed piece of wood and Konstantin Brancusi's sculpture Torso of a Young Man. O'Neill sees the work in his body as collaborations with beavers, using the gnawed wood forms as the impetus for furniture and sculptures. Drawing on the connections between the mark making of the beaver's teeth and the woodworkers' chisellers or saws, O'Neill creates and imagines sculptural tools using cast beaver teeth in playful visual comparisons. Tim maintained a full-time wood studio practice for many years. He attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he received his BS and his MFA, and is currently working in the art department as a 3D technician, specializing in sculpture, foundry, and art metals. In 2021, Tim received the Ann Walls Academic Staff Distinguished Achievement Award, and Tim's also a co-owner of Contemporary Gallery. So I'd like to start by talking about the title of the show first.
Well, first, I want to thank everyone for coming today and listening to me blabber around a little bit about Beaver, Brancusi, and myself. I hope you enjoy it.
So, Tim, can you tell us a little bit about Konstantin Brancusi? Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly.
Yeah.
He was a 20th century modernist sculptor. I think many people would say that he was one of the most famous and important sculptors in America at that time. He was at the front of the modernist movement. He came from a very humble background. He was a peasant. His family was in Romania, so at the base of the Caspian Mountains. But at an early stage, he had some skills in wood carving specifically. And I think somebody noticed that and, asked that he should go on and study school, art school, and he went to Bucharest, and he was in Germany for a while, and then he made his way to Paris. And so there he was at the École de Fine Arts, Beaux-Arts, and he got a degree in art there, and then kind of bounced around different studios, different artists. He did go through Auguste Rodin's studio. He was only there for 2 months. And I think he declared that nothing grows under a large tree. So I think he realized that he needed to make his own mark, basically. And I think abstraction was the way to go with what he was looking at. So, I find him to be very important in my life. I've always been drawn to his work. I think his work developed out of his own upbringing as a folk craft area and kind of folk art, and he utilized those images and objects in his own work through abstraction. So, in a nutshell, I think that's pretty much what he was all about.
Great. So there's these 3 torso sculptures that I realize I'm gesturing outside for you watching this in the recording, but they're right over here. And this was kind of the impetus of this whole show, was this middle one. So can we talk about this?
Sure. So a little step back. So I was up visiting a friend who has a house on 9 acres. That's a wooded lot, and it's bordered on cornered by Halls Creek, which is a body of water that flows into the Black River up in the central Wisconsin. So he and I were up there with Teresa and Kelly Hoffman, and he was beside himself because this beaver had taken up residence and was really attacking all of his trees, and they were all oaks for the most part. And he was disturbed that I'd say 30 to 35 trees had been affected by this. They were either girdled or they're totally fallen down. and he was just beside himself. And as we walked through, I picked up that log that was in the rubble, and just as a light moment, I said, "Hey, this is Brancusi's Torso of a Young Man." He didn't laugh, so it's like, he was still very upset. And at that moment, I started thinking about it because I had previously set up this show last September so that I would be at this time frame. And I was thinking about what to do, and I wasn't quite sure, was it just all furniture or sculpture or a combination. So I think at that moment, it was kind of this epiphany that this is what I should really talk about in this conversation with what the beaver has done, and then turn it over to me. And so we continued walking through the property, and I started seeing things. In fact, the first thing I saw was this piece here, where it was an oak tree that was on the edge of the river, and it was about 40 feet long. So it was on the top bank, and then it kind of went off. And when I looked at it, I was just fascinated by this hinge here. And I immediately saw a hall table. And that has happened to me in the past, where when I work with live edge wood, you see this independent piece of wood that has its own character. And sometimes I know exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a bench or a hall table or a cabinet or something like that. So that happened with this piece here. And we continued on, and it just struck me that this was the labor of this beaver, the end result. I never saw the beaver, but its remnants were there, intact. It was very materialistic, what it was doing. It was very purposeful. And so I really wanted to work around that idea. The other thing is that how it did take down a tree. It used its teeth as tools to gnaw through this hard wood. It's atypical that they're doing oaks, because they usually go to aspen or poplar or something softer wood. But this was an oak grove for the most part, with some pines mixed in. And so I found that to be really amazing, that it left its teeth marks in there almost as if a woodworker using a chisel. And so from there, I started developing this idea of tools. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, was there?
No, it was all fantastic. I just want to return to this, to the torso body of work, and talk a little bit more about the materiality, because these are in many ways overt pastiche to Brancusi. Yes. You're using Brancusi's work very intentionally and critically.
Yeah, and I do consider this a pastiche. Yeah. So, it's kind of honoring him, mm-hmm. what he had done in the past, and I wanted to, since I had that silly idea to begin with, I wanted to really push it a little further and get more serious about it. And when you talk about Brancusi's work, you have to talk about the pedestal. Absolutely. Because that was so important to what he was doing and how he understood his artwork. Mm-hmm. And at some point, he really thought of the pedestal as being kind of stationed in the real world, like you and I. Mm-hmm. But the art was really kind of an ideality of the imagination. Mm-hmm. And so you have these two things that were working together. And I think many people have talked about this, that he really saw this as an abstraction, where when he was working on his art, whether it was a head or a bird or a torso, he removed elements that really stripped it down to its essential being. And he started thinking the same way about a table, or this pedestal table idea, mm-hmm. where he stripped away the legs and this other essential at the top. And so therefore it was an object in and to itself. Mm-hmm. And so you had this object and object. And then a lot of his pedestals too, you'll see this limestone block, and that was the equivalency. So it was what was going on the top and what was going on the bottom were equivalent. Mm-hmm. And so he saw them as those art objects into itself. There's arguments about whether that is true. Some people saw them as being, it's just a decorative object. It's holding up something. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. But I think he saw into it more abstractly and mm-hmm. more in a total way. So what I've done is continue in those steps. He also did a lot of iterations of the same object, whether it was in wood, bronze, plaster, stone. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to emulate that as well. And that's why you see these three pieces. So the wood piece in the middle was the starting point. I took a rubber mold of that, and then from there I could pour wax into that mold into a lost wax casting in bronze. And then the other one, the plaster, it's a simple, mixing plaster and getting a solid plaster casting. I think the thing that surprised me the most is I really like the plaster.
Yeah.
The shadow bounce. I always saw that as kind of a lesser piece, but when I got it in this space, I really started to enjoy it more because of the simple material, what it is, and how sculptors use plaster as both a mold making material and object making material. And I really enjoyed seeing that. And it's truer. I think the surface texture of that is truer than what the bronze piece is. Because the bronze has to get worked a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you discover anything new about the original piece as you cast it in these different materials? Or did you find yourself,
Just recently.
Yeah.
We talked about this, that I wonder why that beaver chewed that piece of wood in that way. Because when you walk through this wooded lot, you see these stumps that are chewed and the tree's fallen down and that branch is taken away, or it's still upright but it's girdled. And I never saw any other components that looked like that. It was a Y of a branch. So why did it separate those two and then the top one? Was it to get it through the woods easier where it wouldn't snag? I'm not sure, but it's a really kind of curious thing to me that it left that piece and that the three components of the points.
Yeah.
It was totally stripped. I mean, it's getting its nutrients from that bark and it can't be layered. So I'm not sure, but it's kind of this continuation of the mystery of that beaver that I was working with. And I couldn't ask it, why did you do that? It's like, so it's.
You could. You need that answer.
Yeah, I'm talking to myself, but it happens too. But
and you did quite a bit of research after this body of work about beavers too.
Because they're curious creatures. They're the largest rodent other than a capybara, so it's the second largest rodent on the planet. They're pretty industrious. I mean, they get these namesakes thrown on them, engineers and industrious and laborious. All that is true. They can change an environment. They're second to humans in changing their local environments. And they really can. I mean, the whole purpose of doing a dam is to create a body of water so that they can build a lodge, and the lodge is in the middle of that deep body of water so that they can live there safely. Because otherwise, you have predators after them, and you have to pretty much have a minimum of 3 feet depth of water before they feel safe. And so from there, they have their family, and it's an extended family. They have usually 2 kits per litter, and then they'll have the juveniles from the year before spending time in the
And they
lodge.
stay with the
Yeah,
parents quite a long time.
Really
for rodents,
it's 2,
like several
3, 4 years
Yeah.
sometimes. So you can have a lodge that would have up to 8, 10, 12 occupants in it.
And then they also allow some visitors into their houses, especially during hibernation.
Yeah, I've seen footage of where they bury a camera inside of the lodge, and you see them in there, and all of a sudden you see the smaller creature what is that? It's a muskrat. So the muskrat is welcome in. They eat the beaver's food. They seem like they have a neighborly relationship, which is interesting. But they're big. I mean, a lodge typically can be 10 to 15 feet across, 10 feet high. They usually have 2 chambers in them. One is kind of like a mudroom kitchen where they eat, and then the other room is where they live. And so the other thing I found fascinating about them is the way they build their lodges. They're taking down these trees. They're taking sticks, bigger sticks. They're burying some of these into the mud, and then they start just piling sticks into that and onto it, and using mud as a binder and leaves and other materials that are around them, and then they go underwater and they start chewing access points.
Okay.
And once they get the access point, they start chewing the negative space out of it to create your environment that you live in. So they're kind of working in a dome type quality.
Yeah. Well, and then you look at kind of hyper modern or guess now probably dated geodesic dome
Yeah.
architecture.
Absolutely, and that's what I thought about it.
Yeah.
We'll get to the
Okay, yeah, we'll talk
final
about it
piece.
later.
My inspiration on that.
Great.
So the beaver is really kind of this incredible creature. They're being used now to be reacclimated into different. So I know Colorado has a program set up right now where they're reacclimating beavers because they're drought-stricken areas. And so from a trickle of water, they can dam it up, create a pond. You're increasing both the quantity of water in the area and the quality of water. So the quantity is helpful because it brings in other flora and fauna.
Yeah.
It develops a groundwater table that's is large as what that body of water is, even deeper. And you need that to revitalize an ecosystem. The other thing that does is that it filters, the dams help filter the water so they can capture carbon. And so that's really important right now, as you all know. So they're really being seen as part of a solution to the issues that we as humans have developed.
Yeah. And I know you already said this, but it just kind of blows my mind that aside from humans, they have changed the landscape of the United States more than anything.
Yeah.
Like that is really compelling.
I think the largest dam is up in Canada, and it's like 2,600 feet.
Wow.
It's a huge body of water.
Yeah.
And it's another interesting thing was like when they're in their environment and if they hear trickling water, that's like an alarm for them. They go and immediately inspect their dam.
Yeah.
And they look for leakage and runoff, and they'll work nonstop until that dam is captured again.
Yeah.
That water is captured.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah. So Tim is well known for his well-designed and technically sophisticated, almost pristine work, often incorporating beautiful veneers and other pieces of wood. But this body of work is quite different. We're looking at a lot of green wood. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of challenges that presented?
Yeah, so green wood is just wood that's been cut and it's basically full of water. So the nutrients going up and down. And once you cut wood, it starts to dry almost immediately. And that involves, at the cut site, usually the end grain. And so it starts checking and cracking. So as it dries further and further, it's going to continue to crack and check and twist and do odd things, bows and all this other stuff that you have to deal with when you're woodwork. But the wood I usually get is all kiln dried or air dried for over a year or 2 years, something like that. So it's very stable. So this wood here is not stable. Okay. The one thing I did to try and help with stability is I used a preservative, which eliminated 30% of the moisture right away.
Okay.
But there's a whole process of kind of soaking it and wrapping it in plastic for a couple of days and re-soaking it and doing that back and forth. And then after a week or two, you could unwrap it and then you dry it off. And then I would wrap it in craft paper or cardboard. Like this was wrapped. This was wrapped in paper and this was wrapped in cardboard to keep that moisture in while it dried. And so this was drying probably for a month and a half. And if you look around it, there's all kinds of cracking that's going on, and it started very thin, and it just starts to open up. But I was aware of that, and it's kind of like, this is all for sale. And it's kind of like buyer beware. So it's like, okay, you're going to buy it at this state, but it's going to continue to move around a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the character and quality of this work. So when I was there, I worked on site with this piece. With a chainsaw, so I know my way around a chainsaw pretty well. I'm not an expert or an arborist or anything like that.
Well, and I would like to mention that these.
We can get to those in a second. But this piece, was on site and it was on the edge of that bank, and so I took my chainsaw and I just started scalping out, and then on the bottom side, I was basically doing it blind because I couldn't get it down there far enough, but I left it 5 inches thick. And from this point, it went about 10 feet out that way. And then I cut it down here, and my friend Greg, who was his property, he was always out there with me. You never want to be by yourself when you're working with a chainsaw. And so I cut this, and we put a strap around this hinge right here, and we dragged it out of the woods with his car. And then my van was at the edge of his yard, and he and I could not lift this. It was like
And it's saturated.
Yeah, it was totally saturated. It was like 250, 300 pounds probably. And we're like, no, I'm gonna hurt myself if I do this.
Yeah.
So I had to make a decision, how long is this haul table gonna be? And so I just cut. And that we could get then up into the van, and then the extra piece, the 8 feet long, whatever, I just threw that in the van. So then I took this to school. I had the advantage of using some of the equipment there in the facilities. I think it's encouraging that I can do my research there as well. But in the foundry, we have an overhead hoist that I managed to strap this up with and then lift it up, and then I could rotate it around and then come back and trim that down to 2 inches and then do my other 45 cuts and things like that. So that was and then the other thing I did is I wanted to eliminate some of that weight and some of the checking and cracking. So this is actually hollow. So I had it on its side, and I was doing plunge cuts, which is you're taking your chainsaw and you're going in on the bottom tip, leveling out, and then just going straight into the wood, which is a dangerous cut to do because the tendency is you're going to get kickback. And so I was very cautious when I was doing that, and it worked out very well. I noticed that when I was doing it, sometimes I would see sawdust out here. I thought, oh, I went a little too far. Because of the nature of what this is, I wasn't concerned about it. Now, if I was making some of my other furniture, I would have scrapped it. It's like, that's unheard of. You don't want that. So I got rid of some of the weight and some of the moisture as well. So that worked out. These pieces here.
We're talking about the totem pieces.
The totems, these long totems. So Greg has an arborist, and he wanted to come through this summer and just take down all these trees that beaver chewed on. And he said, no, you can't touch any of the beaver chewed trees. That's Tim's. And then I went through a couple times, and I decided I didn't really want that tree. It was a big tree and it was girdled. And so he wanted to drop it and practice on how to do slab work, which is, kind of what this is. You're taking thin strips, or could be 3, 4 inches, 2 inches planks, and you're leaving that live edge of where the bark was. So he wanted to practice that, but he just did the top layer. I think that's called forget what it is. But anyways, he left it so that there's a nice flat plane and walked away. And I came back in, and I wanted to have these panels that were 1/2 inch thick. And so I took my chainsaw and I started on my hands and knees, basically cutting horizontally with no guides, just going back and forth. And I didn't have the proper blade on there. You're supposed to have a rip blade, which goes with the grain. It would have been a lot simpler. I just didn't think of it. So I just kind of muscled my way through. But, my chainsaw overheated a lot, and I could only do like 2 of these a day. It was pretty.
But they're playing with the chainsaw.
Yeah, so all those marks of the chainsaw, I wanted the chainsaw marks on there just to create that texture and showing you what was involved with that process. And then from there, I had all these stumps, and then I did that plunge cut again. And these things really are kind of like giant files with a tang. The tang goes into that plunged area, and it's secured with 1 screw. So, but more conceptually, these pieces are totems, which signify symbolic issues of what's going on in a culture or an environment, whatever. So what I did here, the one on that far end there, has those wedge shapes cut out, and then there's another slice. Well, that's the way I would fell a tree, right? I would make a notch and then come around the backside and cut that back cut. That tree's going to fall in the direction of that notch. Okay, so it's symbolic of me working on a tree. This one over here has got that hourglass shape, and that's the way a beaver would do concentric chews around the center until it would tip over, or it gets to a certain point, and it actually lets the wind take it over sometimes. So that's symbolic of how a beaver would work. And so that's kind of representative of how I'm working all of this stuff. Beaver, myself, Brancusi. The middle one is really kind of a profile of one of these stumps, where it all kind of starts, that imagery of that chewed stump. So, and I've done other furniture pieces where I call them totem cabinets. They're on the floor, and they have this signage on them and carved and things like that. But these are really true to the nature of signage or semiosis or semiotic type things.
Yeah.
So.
So let's talk, if we're talking about mark making here,
Yeah.
let's talk about some of these tools you built. So there is an angle grinder, right? That, and then 2 chisels that are over there.
Yeah. So again, back to the original idea, that's like I was really fascinated by teeth as tools, and you can see there's a little skull of a beaver in that back corner. And those give you an idea of what their teeth are like. They're very bright orange, and it's really due to the iron deposits in the food that they're eating, and it gives the teeth a little more strength as well. So I thought of this literal representation of teeth as tools in the format of gouges, which a woodworker would normally use on large slabs of wood like this. So cast made rubber molds of the teeth. From there you have waxes. You can add on to the wax. There it's lost wax. You develop the bronze sculpture from that. And then they're turned handles. The one thing that's a little slightly different is like a tool like that would generally be laid down on your bench, you know. But I left the end part of the turning of the handle, and I was looking at it vertically, and I started thinking about, well, that's a way a sculpture would look at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
the way Brancusi. You're taking that object and you're raising the ideal of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're changing the context.
Yeah.
And you kind of see that again in these torso pieces, because the way that would be growing in a tree, it would be inverted. So there's almost like this kind of Duchamp thing happening there.
Yeah, one of his contemporaries.
Yeah.
But so I really like the idea that they were vertical, and I was looking at A Bird in Space, one of Brancusi's great pieces, and I wanted to pursue that quality of line. This is a clumsy effort, but the idea was there, you know, and the bases were actually identical to how he would. I saw some of them with The Bird in Space, that it was on a cruciform of wood, and then that cylinder of limestone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a direct copy of what he would have been doing. So I'm glad, it brings it back to that.
Yeah.
And then this piece over here is just this silly idea of this rotary tool that we use, that I used. I actually used it on one of these stools. That it's kind of like this half disc dome shape with spikes on it. And when you turn it on, it's extremely aggressive. It has a lot of thrust to it, so it eats away wood very quickly. It's kind of a dangerous tool, and I wanted to like amp that up, and I wanted to I put the lower pairs of teeth on that. There's 5 of them in that rotary configuration, that circular configuration, with the idea that this would wickedly chew through wood. So I have not turned that on yet. Because I think it would be like this. I do want to, and I think I'm going to set it up on like a rheostat, like a sewing machine rheostat, and plug it in, and slowly see how it rotates around. But it's not balanced for one thing. So it's
kind of this absurd object.
Yeah, it is really absurd.
Yeah.
It's
but it allows you to play with some of those ideas.
It does.
Yeah.
About the nature of the tools. So I'm really happy that I came up with that.
So let's talk about the Halls Creek Lodge 2.0 piece.
Yeah, that's the piece over in the corner. So that's kind of the one of the first ideas I had, and it started out as a very complex idea of maybe a reliquary type thing, where I wanted some imagery involved in it, and I wanted an object involved with it. The object in there is, again, a casting of the wood piece here, and I wanted to talk about, you know, the cycle where we all need a few things, elemental things. We need food, we need water, and we need shelter to survive. And it's the same thing with the beaver. You know, and it needs its lodge, and it needs its cachet, and it needs its water to be in for safety. And so those are the things I was thinking about that. And originally it was a really complex idea, and as time went on, I pared it down, and I ended up running out of time. So I kind of really synthesized what the elements were. And then the other idea was that, you know, man always introducts itself into nature. And we think we're doing it better, but we actually are not. I mean, just look at the end results of our world, right? So I wanted to notarize that idea. So I'm thinking, well, if I would do it, I'd make a concrete foundation, and that lodge would be a dome, and it would be a geodesic dome because that's the structural stability that we really highlight in architecture, and plastic, and so that's 3D printed plastic. So that's a randomized design of a dome that I had help with a previous grad, Derek Kiesling, who helped me kind of do the 3D modeling of that and then have it printed. And then at the other end, the cache is cast iron. So that's like 60 pounds. And it's really representing the food stuff and the food that the beaver needs. And so again, it's a man-made material. It's subtractive out of this earth, right? And then the structure that it's in is kind of this infinity symbol of how life is created and develops and continues. And so you have all these elements coming together. I thought that was a really kind of poetic notion of this whole body of work.
And it's got water from Halls Creek in it as well.
Yeah, that was really important that I brought some of the water for it to be in. So.
Great. Well, is there anything else you want to touch on before?
Oh, just a couple other furniture
Okay, yeah,
pieces.
let's talk about those.
I made some stools.
Yeah.
Really, I didn't make them again. The beaver did that. I just cut them off. And one interesting note on these stools is that I cut them parallel. I sanded them nicely, took a photograph of them, and from there the photograph was put into Photoshop, scaled, and then I had a friend at school, Aaron McAdams, laser cut them in leather for me. So it's this idea of image and object. So that image, as a photograph is a moment trapped in time, and then from there the object is continually moving. So you could take the leather seats off, and you would see how that drying out process has affected it.
Has changed it.
Yeah, it has changed what I was talking about
Yeah.
too. So I just like that idea of this moment of time and then the continuation of time.
Yeah.
So but it's this really simple object. Right? So, and then this piece, I really like this piece. It's a bench. The two boards are the only wood that I did not get out of Greg's woodlot. They're elm that I got from Restore. They have a company that cuts urban wood and they sell it to the public. And I really like those pieces. They're very unusual. There's like really unusable boards because they're so thin and odd, but it has a live edge to it. And I've had these for a couple of years, and I was playing around with them, and I crossed them over and C-clamped them, and they were that way in our basement for like 2 years. And I just absolutely loved that shape and what it was saying, but I didn't have an idea for the legs. So then when this project came about, I said, "Wow, I know what the legs are. Tree stumps." And they're dowels that are acting as through tenons with some splines in there. The other thing is the half lap, so you take away half the material on top of the board, half the material on the bottom of the board. They fit in flushly to each other. Since that's the narrowest point, it was really spongy and soft. So underneath there's a steel plate that's screwed in. So you could tap dance on that. So I was really happy with the results of that. But I think it's just a kind of clever little thing.
Yeah. So a lot of your work is really your practice is interdisciplinary. How did that come about, and what are the benefits and challenges of working in multimedia?
Yeah, so I started out as a furniture maker. I was trained by an individual studio artist, well, actually two, Richard Judd and Ron DeCoke. And I came to them with no experience in woodworking whatsoever. I had a design sensibility. I had architecture background, interior design background. So I had a design sense. I was good spatially with things. But they taught me woodworking, and they were kind of polar opposites. One, Richard was really kind of tight and anal retentive, and some people here know his work. It's really precise work. And Ron DeCoke was just kind of a slob about everything. And when I first met him, I went into his shop, and it was pathways to the machines. Sawdust. You're walking through sawdust pathways. And I'm thinking, who are these two guys? And I met them really close to the same amount of time. And I worked for Richard as a job, and then for Ron, he and I decided that he could build me an apartment in one of his buildings, and that was fascinating unto itself. But so I ended up working for him as well on weekends. So I got these two different views of what woodworking is and what furniture making is, and from there I kind of took off, and then I wanted to blow off some steam, and I wanted to visit this young woman that I met who was really fascinating to me. I think some of you know her, Teresa Abel. And I was living out in the country, and she was in Madison, and I guess I needed an excuse to go visit her. So I took up adult education classes, and I took a metalsmithing class with this woman right here, Holly Cohn. And I think when I came to you, I had the skills. I was learning how to work with my hands and understanding materials. And I came to you, and I started putting things together with no knowledge. And I think you were amazed at what I was doing. And I think you said, "What do you do for a living?" So it's like, I do things, And so she encouraged me through the years to the point where she said, "You got to go see Fred Fenster at the UW." And I did. And I met with Fred, and I said, "Do you think I could come to school here?" And he said, "Yes, definitely." And so I had been out in the world, 3 different universities and a college, different majors, and I never completed an undergrad. So I at that moment, I decided I really wanted to get my degree just as a sign of accomplishment, and I knew what I wanted to do at that point. And so under Fred's tutelage, I finished my BS there, and then he wanted me to go to grad school, and then I took some time off, and then came back in 2001, and that's when Lisa Grolnick came in. So she became my main professor along with Fred, which was very, very important for me at that point. And along the way, I was taking foundry classes with Peter Flannery in Eris, and I was really interested in that. I thought this was a good develop skill set also, and it was proved to be important in my work too, like right now. So I help run the foundry at school. I do metalsmithing. I haven't done a lot of the jewelry type things lately, just because I'm always busy. I've had commissions now probably for about 20 years, just nonstop.
Yeah.
So people wait for me. I get do one and go on to the next one. Do this body work. I have a few commissions already lined up again to finish. So I have the skills and the knowledge to work them in together. In the beginning, when I was doing metalsmithing, I kept them really separate because they were really doing 2 different things for me. The furniture making was more about a design issue and customizing it to people. I wanted them to be comfortable in their houses. With the metalsmithing, I saw that as an outlet for me to express my opinions, my ideas, my political stance of what's going on socially, economically in this country. So those were kind of separated. And I see them all kind of coming back together.
Yeah, this definitely feels like kind of the union of those 2 things, where you have like this almost environmental aspect, and
So
just kind of beautiful objects.
I look forward to doing more of that. So.
Anything else you'll get before we open up to questions?
That's it.
Anyone like to ask anything?
Tom?
Did you ever see a beaver
You never saw the beaver?
while during this project?
Yeah.
You didn't see him swimming in the pond or anything?
So we were out there last November. You could see the lodge in the water, but there was no. I never saw it walking out. Greg never saw it either. But you saw the end result of its labor, all over the place.
Yeah.
So that's the motivating factor there.
Eris?
So, somebody like yourself has got incredible technical skills, and you've worked with a lot of sophisticated technology, for example, 3D printing and whatnot. But I'm always fascinated by the idea of, for example, the architecture that the beaver does.
Yeah.
Do you connect with that?
Yeah.
The idea that nature, there's things going on in nature that are very sophisticated in some senses, but also incredibly simple.
Yeah. They've tried to mimic what beavers do, humans, and we can't. The way they engineer it, and it's like I said before, it's very purposeful. It needs that body of water, and it's cleaning that water. I do see them as very well engineered objects. And I'm really interested in that.
I mean, do you ever get frustrated with technology?
Oh, absolutely. Well, so one of my jobs at the university a while ago was, working in the makerspace, and digital environment is not friendly with me. I just don't get it. But I surrounded myself with students and people that did understand it, think a good sign of a manager is get people in there that know better than you and just help them work through it. And the system ran, it worked well. I passed it on to someone else. I understand the digital aspect of 3D printing, laser cutting, CNC routing. I do use a CNC router myself. But I don't have to do it all. As you know, you can job it out, and that's been a tradition with artists for millennia.
Yeah.
That they don't have to do everything. And for a very long time, that's the way I felt. I like working by myself. I like thinking about what I'm doing, but I don't always have to do it myself. So I can bring the experts in, or bring people that have that knowledge that I don't have.
Yeah.
Or the capacity of it.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that.
How long did you work with those? How long did you work with the woodworkers that you taught those two guys?
So Richard, I worked full time for about 5 years, and then I went part time because I wanted to start making my own body of work. And he allowed me to use his studio at no charge after hours, because I didn't have any equipment, I didn't have a space, and at that time I started buying equipment, and I bought a storage unit. So I was going to auctions, and I bought a brand new table saw, went in a storage unit for 2 years until we bought our first building, and then that became my studios. Ron, boy, that was just because I was living right there. It was just ongoing. I would work for him for many years, and I was doing street art fairs at the time too, along with both Rick and Ron. Sometimes we were all doing the same show, so we would kind of watch each other and help. But I spent a lot of time with Ron, who's really instrumental in my work. I think he had a really great eye in how to manipulate wood and both of them really great artists. And then I can't stop there either. There's Fred Fenster and Lisa Gromnick, and Eris for that matter too, were really helpful in me developing my skill sets and the way I see things in the world. So, you had a question.
Yeah, right now the woodpeckers are using their natural tool to destroy the cedar siding on my house.
Me too.
And I wondered, they're creating natural mortises, I guess. So I wondered if, after working on this show, if as you walk through nature, you're now seeing new inspiration.
Yeah, I just covered up the woodpecker hole last week, and I think Eris has talked about this, and he has a piece downstairs that is punctuated with woodpecker holes. And then as I was filling out that hole on my cedar siding, I thought of these. I thought maybe I could just do a dot with a little square in there and make it decorative. So, yeah.
Well, you grew up in the country, so your childhood's more imbued with rusticness than many people. But we've all seen your sleek, sophisticated, high style pieces, and we probably looked at this postcard 2 or 3 times. What happened to Tim? He's gone rustic on us. Did this feel like a fundamental going back to your rustic country roots?
I have to actually correct you because I grew up in Milwaukee.
Oh, okay. Well, you said you grew up in the country.
Well, I've been living in the country for a very long time. But I spent 31 years in Milwaukee City proper. That's where I grew up. But then when I moved to Madison, I lived in Madison for a year, and then I moved out to Basco, where that's your same township. So I lived there in Basco for a month shy of 20 years. And then Teresa and I moved out to our schoolhouse, which is out in Blanchardville, Wisconsin, even further out in the sticks. And we were out there for 5 years. So a good 25 years we were rural. And I really enjoyed being out there too. I really did it. It changes your point of view on the world, the built world that we live in. And so I was really happy to actually go into this. Working for one thing outside was really different for me with my chainsaw, and luckily the many days that I was out there, they were all beautiful days. And I thought, well, I could just stay out here. Could happen. So anyway, any other questions?
I have a question
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
beavers. When you started your story, you talked about how many trees were damaged on your friend's property.
Yeah.
And it sounded, if I understood it correctly, they were in different stages of being used
Mhm.
by the beaver. Do you, in the end, the beaver builds the hut
The lodge, yeah.
or the lodge, and there's a lot left from, it sounds like, from what,
Yeah,
how does anybody know how they go about deciding they have to keep attacking more and more
Well,
trees rather than use up what
yeah,
they've already
right.
done?
are you saying they're wasteful?
I-
Maybe they're hanging around humans too much.
I don't know what I'm saying
No,
about waste.
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
because what it is, from what I gleaned in the information is, so the tree comes down, they're going for those branches higher up that are thinner, they have leaves on it, that's their food source right there. And then some of them become their structural support for the lodge. So, they're eating aquatic plants, they're vegetarians, they're eating aquatic plants, they're eating leaves, they're eating saplings, they're eating thin willow, things like that. So, but, if they're taking down a tree, they're gonna go after those more succulent things too.
So then they're not really interested once they've got the tree down with
Well,
the bigger parts of the tree.
well, they can't do much with it because they
Right.
can't haul it out of the
Right.
woods. Like this tree here was this big around and it was 40 feet long, so there's no way it could do that.
So,
It's struggling with probably branches this big to pull out of the.
so this was on his property, which I assume he went to with some regularity.
Yes.
How long did he figure out that the beaver was at that much work? Was it years or a short period
Well,
of time?
I think some of them were like this. This is an older tree that was taken down. This looks almost like it's starting to heal itself right here. So I think they've been around, and maybe they decided, well, this is where we're going to put our lodge. And so once they establish that, they need to start taking trees down for both the structural material and the food. So I'm not quite sure how long the process. I just remember that we were up there last November, and he was just really beside himself. And he wanted to kill him and trap him or do whatever he had to do to get rid of him. And that's the mindset of a lot of landowners, because it is problematic. You have a property that you want for particular reasons, and if that gets disrupted, then what do you do? You can try and relocate them. Doesn't mean more beavers will come downstream. That's always a possibility there. So, but I'm glad that I talked about earlier is like relocating them. There are groups of people and organizations that do that. It's just that they have to find locations that are not disruptive to humans, because the human is always going to react in a very severe way. So. Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Really good questions.
Just as a reminder, the show is up until November 6th, and we also have 2 other wonderful shows on view till that time: the Charles Munch Miracles and Mysteries and our 19th annual Ceramics Invitational. Thank you all so much for coming.
All right.